At 37, Emma Carter had just been fired from the only forestry company she'd worked for in nearly 15 years. She walked out carrying a cardboard box, exactly $18 in her wallet, and no idea where she would sleep after the end of the month. Then a lawyer handed her papers saying she'd inherited an abandoned forest station from an uncle she barely remembered. The locals laughed when she arrived. "That place isn't worth the drive," one man said. "Sell the timber rights and leave before the roof falls in." Even the hardware store owner shook her head when Emma spent part of her last $18 on supplies instead of turning back. But 3 weeks later, while tearing away a rotten wall inside the old station, Emma noticed something no blueprint mentioned. Behind the faded boards was a steel outline hidden inside solid timber. She brushed away decades of dust, found an old survey mark carved into the frame, and realized there was a room that no official record admitted had ever existed. What she discovered beyond that wall would uncover a forgotten legacy buried beneath the forest for decades. So before we open that hidden door, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. If you're just starting your day, I hope it's a wonderful one, filled with good news. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories about forgotten legacies, hidden family secrets, and second chances, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for the journey. Emma Carter learned she had been fired at 9:17 on a gray Monday morning, when her supervisor closed the office door and placed a white envelope between them. For nearly 15 years, she had worked for the same forestry company, first marking access roads, then managing field reports and timber inventories. She had believed that experience made her useful. The envelope told her otherwise. "Restructuring," her supervisor said, avoiding her eyes. "The decision came from above." Emma stared at the severance figure, then at the cardboard box beside the filing cabinet. By noon, she was carrying her boots, coffee mug, and 2 framed photographs through a lobby where everyone suddenly seemed fascinated by their screens. Outside, rain gathered on the windshield of her aging sedan. She sat behind the wheel and counted what remained after rent and the automatic payment that had cleared that morning. $18. The number looked absurd on the banking app, too small to belong to an adult with years of work behind her. She drove home without turning on the radio. Her apartment smelled faintly of damp carpet, and the silence made the cardboard box seem larger than it was. Before she could decide whom to call, her phone rang. The caller introduced himself as Philip Arden, an attorney handling the estate of Daniel Pierce. Emma almost ended the call. She knew the name only from childhood references her mother's older brother, a man who had disappeared into the northern forests long ago. "Mr. Pierce named you as his sole heir," the attorney said. "The estate consists mainly of an old forest station and the surrounding parcel." Emma looked at the unpaid electric bill on the counter. "A station, a former survey and ranger outpost. It is not operated for decades." 2 days later, with $18 still folded in her wallet, Emma drove 3 hours north, through narrowing roads and heavy pine country. The pavement ended at a weathered sign leaning toward a ditch. Beyond it, the road became mud and stone. Branches scraped the car doors. Twice, she stopped to drag fallen limbs aside. By the time the forest station appeared, dusk had gathered between the trees. It was larger than she expected and worse than she feared. A long timber building with a sagging porch, moss-dark shingles, boarded windows, and a rusted radio mast. A faded emblem remained above the entrance. Emma stepped out and listened. No traffic, no machinery, only wind moving through spruce needles. The front door resisted until she pushed with her shoulder. Dust rose around her boots. Inside, the main room held a stone stove, overturned chairs, metal filing cabinets, and a wall map curled brown at the corners. Water stains spread across the ceiling. Hope collapsed inside her. Even selling the place would require money she did not have. Headlights swept across the windows. A truck stopped outside, and a tall man in a green field jacket approached. He introduced himself as Ben Holloway, the local ranger. His voice was cautious but not unfriendly. "Attorney said you might arrive today." He glanced at the roofline. "Don't stay in the east room. Floor's soft near the wall." Emma folded her arms against the cold. "Is any part safe?" "Safe enough, if you're careful." He showed her how to start the stove and pointed out a hand pump behind the building. Though the water needed boiling. Before leaving, he paused. "Daniel kept this place standing longer than anyone expected." "You knew him. Everyone around here knew of him." The answer carried a distance Emma noticed but did not understand. The next morning, she drove 6 miles to a small general store for matches, bread, and cleaning cloths. The owner, Martha Green, studied Emma's face after hearing her name. "Daniel's niece," she said quietly. "He died alone up there." Emma placed her items on the counter. "Was he always alone?" Martha's expression softened. "Near the end, yes. But lonely and alone aren't always the same thing." She refused Emma's attempt to put back the bread when the total exceeded her cash. "Pay me later, back at the station." Emma spent the afternoon clearing glass and moving ruined furniture away from damp walls. Each task steadied her. Sweep, lift, sort, breathe. Near sunset, she returned to the old wall map. Beneath it, partly hidden by grime, was a framed floor plan. The paper showed the office, storage room, bunk room, kitchen, and a narrow chamber drawn behind the north wall. Emma walked the wall twice. There was no door, window, or opening. Only solid boards and an old cabinet pushed against them. She dragged the cabinet aside. Nothing appeared except dust. Then she measured the room with Ben's spare tape. The outside wall extended nearly 8 feet farther than the interior space allowed. Emma looked back at the floor plan. The narrow chamber was clearly labeled, but age had blurred most of the word. Only the final letters remained legible. Room. Someone had not merely closed the space. Someone had removed it from the station. Emma slept badly beside the stone stove, waking whenever the wind pressed against the boarded windows. By morning, the station felt less like an inheritance and more like a test she had already failed. The roof leaked into 2 dented buckets. The hand pump groaned before producing a thin stream of brownish water. Her phone showed 1 weak bar of service near the porch and none inside. Still, the floor plan remained on the table where she had left it. The narrow, missing chamber marked behind the north wall. She began with practical work because practical work required no faith. She swept mouse droppings from the office, stacked salvageable chairs, and pried water-damaged boards from the kitchen doorway. When she moved an old desk away from the wall, one drawer fell open and spilled rusted clips, survey pencils, and a ring of mismatched keys. Most were ordinary brass keys tagged with faded paper labels: tool shed, radio cabinet, south locker. One had no label. It was longer than the others, dark with age, and cut with unusually deep teeth. Emma slipped it into her pocket. Near noon, an engine approached along the muddy road. A polished black truck stopped beside her sedan. Too clean for the forest. The man who stepped out wore expensive boots and a waxed coat. He introduced himself as Caleb Morris and looked past her toward the station before offering his hand. "I own Morris Timber," he said. "We manage several parcels around this side of the county." Emma knew the company name from old reports at her former job. "What brings you here?" "I heard Daniel's estate finally transferred." His smile was practiced. "Properties like this become burdens fast. Taxes, repairs, access maintenance. I thought I might save you some trouble. He handed her a folded offer. The amount was more money than she had seen in months, yet far below what even neglected forest acreage should bring. "You made this offer without inspecting the building," she asked. "The building has no value." Caleb glanced at the sagging roof. "Frankly, neither does much else here unless it's folded into a larger operation." His certainty irritated her more than the low number. "I'm not selling today." "Of course." He tucked his gloves into one hand. "But weather changes quickly, and old structures become expensive when winter comes." Before leaving, he looked toward the north side of the station for a moment longer than necessary. Emma watched his truck disappear between the trees, then unfolded the offer again. For several minutes, she imagined taking it. She could pay her rent, repair her car, and stop waking with $18 between herself and disaster. Then she remembered the missing space on the floor plan and Caleb's description of the station as worthless before he had even stepped inside. She folded the paper and placed it beneath a cracked ledger. Ben arrived that afternoon carrying a toolbox and a coil of rope. He inspected the porch supports, tightened a loose stove fitting, and helped Emma cover part of the leaking roof with an old tarp. When she showed him Caleb's offer, Ben's mouth flattened. "He moves quickly. Is the land worth more?" "Probably. Depends on boundaries, access rights, and timber restrictions. He said the building had no value." Ben looked through the doorway at the old map and cabinets. "Caleb measures value differently than Daniel did." Emma asked what that meant, but Ben only said that Daniel had spent years arguing over surveys, protected stands, and boundary records. Some people respected him. Others called him difficult. He kept filing reports after the station closed. Ben said, "Reports about what?" "He never told me much. I was younger then. Most people thought he couldn't let go of the job." Before Ben left, Emma showed him the floor plan and the missing 8 feet behind the north wall. He studied it carefully. Could be an old storage passage sealed during repairs. Why erase the door? Maybe they didn't. Maybe this drawing is older than the wall. His answer was reasonable, but his expression was not dismissive. At the general store the next morning, Martha gave Emma a small box of nails on credit and listened as she described the strange key. "Daniel carried keys for everything," Martha said, "even things nobody else remembered existed." She reached beneath the counter and brought out an old photograph in a cardboard sleeve. It showed 6 workers standing in front of the forest station many years earlier. Daniel was younger, lean and unsmiling, with one hand resting on a survey tripod. Emma recognized the porch and radio mast, but the north side of the building looked different. A narrow exterior window appeared where the present wall showed only weathered boards. "When was this taken?" Emma asked. "Late 80s, I think." Martha tapped Daniel's face. "Before he stopped coming into town, except for supplies." Emma borrowed the photograph and returned to the station before dark. She compared it with the exterior wall. The old window had been covered so carefully that the siding pattern nearly concealed it, though the boards around the outline were slightly newer. Inside, she moved the heavy cabinet again and cleared the remaining debris. The long key fit none of the visible cabinets, desks, or exterior locks. Frustrated, she sat on the floor beneath the floor plan. Ben arrived near sunset to return a lantern she had left in his truck. Emma handed him the photograph. He studied the old window, then looked at the wall. Together they measured from the exterior corner and marked where the opening should have been. Ben pressed his palm against the boards. This section was rebuilt. Emma took the handle of a screwdriver and struck the wall beside the mark. The sound was solid. She moved 6 inches to the left and struck again. Still solid. A third tap produced a low, hollow knock from somewhere beyond the boards. Both of them went still. Emma tapped once more. the empty space answered from behind the wall. Ben set the lantern on the floor and ran his fingers along the boards until he found a seam hidden beneath old paint. Emma held the light while he worked the pry bar into the gap. The first plank resisted, groaning against nails driven deep into the studs. When it finally came loose, a breath of cold, stale air slipped through the opening. Behind it was not insulation or empty framing, but another wall. Ben removed 2 more boards, and a flat sheet of dark metal emerged beneath the dust. Emma brushed it with her sleeve. The surface was scarred but solid. "That isn't part of a repair," she said. Ben leaned closer. A narrow vertical line ran down the center, and beneath the grime they found the outline of hinges. It was a door, built from steel and set inside a reinforced frame. The old exterior window in Martha's photograph had not simply been covered. Someone had replaced it with a barrier. They cleared enough wood to expose the full shape. The door was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, and welded shut along 3 sides. Thick beads of metal sealed the frame from top to bottom. Near waist height sat a blackened keyhole. Emma pulled the long key from her pocket. "This has to be it." Ben examined the welds. "Maybe once, not anymore." She pushed the key into the lock. It entered halfway, then stopped. She turned it gently, then harder. Nothing moved. The teeth scraped inside with a dry metallic sound. She withdrew it and tried again, but the key would not seat. "Wrong key," Ben said, "or the lock was damaged before they sealed it." Emma stared at the welded edges. The room marked on the floor plan was real. But whoever closed it had intended it to stay closed. That certainty unsettled her more than the hidden space itself. She imagined Daniel standing where she stood, watching sparks jump from a welding torch. Had he ordered the door sealed? Or had someone done it against his wishes? Ben tested the metal with the pry bar, but the frame did not flex. "We'll need a grinder," he said, "and a generator strong enough to run it. Mine is at the ranger shed, but I can't bring it until tomorrow." Emma wanted to argue, yet the dark outside had already swallowed the windows. They replaced the loose boards across the opening, not to hide it, but to keep cold air from filling the station. Ben told her not to work on the door alone. "Steel under tension can shift when it's cut. I know how to use tools." "I'm sure you do. I'm also sure you're tired." His tone was practical, not patronizing, and that made it harder to resent. After he left, Emma fed another split log into the stove and tried to sleep. But the hidden door seemed to alter the shape of the building. Every settling noise came from the north wall. Near midnight, she rose and returned to the office. She searched the filing cabinets again, this time removing drawers and checking the spaces behind them. Most held mildew-stained forms, faded supply lists, and reports too damaged to read. In the bottom drawer of a cabinet marked Field Records, she found a thin black notebook pressed beneath a stack of blank survey sheets. The cover had no title. Inside, Daniel's handwriting filled the first pages in tight, slanted lines. Many entries described ordinary work, washed out trails, boundary markers, storm damage, and equipment repairs. Then a sentence stopped her. "Survey room inventory incomplete. Access restricted until records can be verified." Emma read it twice. A later entry mentioned the room again. "North wall secured. Originals remain inside. Do not move them to county storage." The words were not dramatic, but their caution felt deliberate. She continued turning pages. Several had been removed cleanly near the binding. Others contained lists of map numbers, dates, and coordinates she did not recognize. Near the back, Daniel had written that duplicate measurements disagreed with official records, though he did not explain how. Emma closed the notebook when headlights swept across the porch. For one anxious moment, she thought Ben had returned. but the truck outside was black and polished. Caleb Morris stepped through the doorway without waiting for an invitation. "You should lock up," he said. "Anyone could wander in." Emma kept the notebook beside her leg, hidden by the table. "Most people don't drive 6 miles into the woods after midnight." Caleb smiled as though she had made a joke. "I was nearby." "Doing what?" "Checking a boundary road." His gaze moved across the office and paused on the loosened boards covering the north wall. "Looks like you've been busy." Emma stood. "The offer hasn't changed my mind." "It should. I spoke with my accountant. I can add $5,000 if you sign this week." The increase came too quickly. "Why?" "Because delays cost money." "Whose delays?" His expression tightened, then relaxed. "Yours, eventually. The roof will fail. Access will wash out. You don't have the equipment to maintain this place." Emma thought of the generator Ben planned to bring and of the notebook under her hand. "Then buying it would be a poor decision for you." Caleb's smile disappeared. "Sentiment makes people careless. Miss Carter." Daniel learned that. Before she could ask what he meant, he turned and left. His truck vanished down the road, leaving the station silent again. Emma waited until she could no longer hear the engine. Then she opened the notebook and searched the remaining pages for Caleb's name, but found none. On the inside back cover, a folded sheet had been tucked beneath the binding. The paper was brittle, and Daniel's handwriting was shakier than in the earlier entries. Emma unfolded it carefully. There was only one complete sentence. "If you are reading this, it means they failed." Ben returned shortly after sunrise with a portable generator, an angle grinder, 2 heavy extension cords, and a canvas bag of protective gear. Emma had already pulled the loose boards from the north wall and laid Daniel's black notebook open on the table. She showed him the folded message from the back cover. He read the sentence once, then again. "Do you know who they were?" she asked. Ben shook his head. "Daniel argued with plenty of people, but this doesn't sound like an ordinary disagreement." He handed the note back without offering a theory. Outside, the generator coughed twice before settling into a hard, mechanical rumble that disturbed the quiet forest. Ben covered the floor with damp blankets to catch sparks. Emma wore goggles and held the lantern while he cut through the welds along the steel frame. The grinder screamed against the metal, filling the station with the smell of hot iron. Each section took longer than expected. The welds had been laid thickly, then reinforced at the corners. Whoever sealed the door had not worked in haste. When Ben reached the lower edge, the cutting disc snapped. A fragment struck the wall and buried itself in an old beam. He switched off the tool and waited until the disc stopped spinning. "That's why I told you not to do this alone." Emma looked at the gouge in the timber and nodded. They replaced the disc and continued. Nearly an hour later, only the lock remained. The long key still would not seat. So Ben drilled through the damaged mechanism, while Emma braced the handle with both hands. The final piece broke free with a dull crack. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Emma pulled. The steel door opened less than an inch before catching against something inside. Cold air escaped through the gap, carrying the smell of dust, paper, and old wood. Together they pushed harder. A fallen shelf scraped across the floor beyond the door, then toppled with a crash. The opening widened enough for Emma to raise the lantern and look inside. The room was narrow but longer than the floor plan suggested. Shelves covered 3 walls from floor to ceiling. Rolled maps filled wooden racks. Metal cases stood beneath a workbench. Dust lay so thick that the beam from the lantern seemed to cut through smoke. An old survey tripod leaned in one corner beside a transit level in a cracked leather case. On the workbench sat compasses, measuring chains, marking flags faded almost white, and field notebooks tied in bundles. Ben stepped in behind her and swept his flashlight across the ceiling. No obvious collapse, he said. But move slowly. Emma's boots left sharp prints in the dust. She felt as though she had entered a room that had been waiting, without air or sound, for decades. On the first shelf, dozens of maps were labeled by year and district. Some bore Daniel's handwriting. Others carried official county stamps. She opened one roll across the workbench and found contour lines, streams, access roads, and hand-drawn notes marking old growth stands. A second map showed the same region with several boundary lines shifted east. "These don't match," she said. Ben leaned over the paper. "No, they should." The difference was not large on the page, but Emma understood enough from years of field reports to know that a narrow line could represent hundreds of acres. They examined more rolls. Several maps had duplicate versions, one official and one covered with Daniel's corrections. Dates, initials, and measurement notes filled the margins. On another shelf, Emma found rows of photographs stored in paper envelopes. The earliest images showed survey crews beside young pines and fresh-cut trails. Later photographs captured the same locations year after year, tree lines growing denser, streams changing course, boundary posts weathering in place. Daniel had labeled each image with coordinates and dates. In one sequence, a stand of massive cedar appeared untouched across more than 20 years. In another, a logging road approached the same area, then stopped abruptly. He was documenting change. Emma said, "Or proving something didn't change." Ben replied. Beneath the photographs were correspondence files arranged alphabetically. Many folders remained sealed by dust, but one section contained a clear gap. Metal dividers marked survey disputes, original plats, and county transfers. The space between them was wide enough for several folders, yet only pale rectangles remained where documents had once rested. Emma ran a finger through the dust. "These were removed." Ben examined the shelf. "A long time ago, probably. The dust has settled evenly. Before the room was sealed, most likely. That meant someone had taken selected records and then welded the door shut. Or Daniel had sealed the room after discovering the loss. Neither possibility comforted her. Emma searched the workbench drawers. The first held dried ink bottles and broken pencils. The second contained metal tags stamped with survey numbers. The third was locked. She tried the long key. This time it slid fully into the mechanism. The lock turned with surprising ease. Inside lay a stack of photographs, 3 folded letters, and a small field ledger. Emma lifted the ledger first, but the opening pages contained only equipment inventories. The letters were addressed but never mailed, their envelopes unsealed, before she could read them. Ben called from the far wall. "Emma, look at this." A large map had been pinned behind a hanging canvas sheet. Unlike the others, it covered nearly the entire wall. The forest station sat near its southern edge. Rivers, ridgelines, and old access trails spread northward in Daniel's careful markings. One isolated tract had been circled repeatedly in red pencil. Beside it, in letters pressed so hard they had nearly torn the paper, Daniel had written, "Do not let them take this place." Emma copied the coordinates from the red-circled map before rolling it carefully back into place. The letters from the locked drawer remained on the workbench, still unopened. But Ben insisted they first understand who had worked with Daniel and what the town remembered. By mid-morning, they were driving toward the nearest cluster of houses beyond Martha's store, carrying the old crew photograph and Daniel's field ledger in a canvas bag. Their first stop was a weathered mobile home beside a closed sawmill road. Arthur Vale, a retired equipment operator in his 70s, opened the door only after Ben called his name twice. He recognized Daniel immediately. "Pierce never knew when to leave well enough alone," Arthur said. studying the photograph without inviting them inside. Every stump was evidence. Every boundary post was sacred. Emma asked whether Daniel had ever mentioned altered maps. Arthur gave a dry laugh. He mentioned nothing else for years. Said lines were moving on paper while trees stayed where God put them. Was he wrong? Emma asked. Arthur's smile faded. Wrong men can still sound certain. He returned the photograph and closed the door. The second former employee lived above an auto repair shop. June Adler had worked as a seasonal records clerk at the station when she was 19. She remembered Daniel as patient with measurements and impatient with people. He checked every figure twice, she said, then checked whoever checked him. She admitted that workers had begun calling the hidden room Daniel's vault, though she had never been allowed inside. People thought he was hoarding old papers because he couldn't accept the station was becoming irrelevant. Did he ever explain why, Emma asked? June looked toward the shop window. He said originals mattered when copies changed. The words matched what Emma had seen in the survey room. Before they left, June searched a desk and found a faded address book. 2 names from the crew photograph had been crossed out. One remained. Walter Kane, former boundary technician. Martha knew where to find him. He lived alone in a small cabin south of the river, where the road narrowed between alder thickets and shallow ditches. Walter answered wearing suspenders over a wool shirt. He was thin, sharp-eyed, and clearly irritated by strangers. But when Emma said Daniel Pierce had left her the forest station, his expression shifted. He left it to family after all, he murmured. I wasn't sure he would. Walter allowed them into a kitchen heated by an iron stove. Emma placed the crew photograph on the table. He touched Daniel's image with one finger. That was before the trouble. What trouble? Walter leaned back. A logging crew crossed an old boundary north of Blackwater Ridge. They claimed the markers were wrong. Daniel said the cutting permit had been drawn against a revised plat that didn't match the original survey. Ben asked how far the crew had gone. Far enough to open a road. Not far enough to reach the Cedar Basin. Walter's jaw tightened. Daniel drove his truck across the access track and refused to move. Sat there 6 hours while the company foreman threatened arrest. Then he called the county, the state office, anyone who might listen. Did they stop? Emma asked. For that day? Walter looked at her carefully. Afterward, people said Daniel had caused trouble over a few trees. It wasn't a few trees. It was the start of a line that would have swallowed the whole basin. Emma thought of the repeated photographs, the untouched cedar stand, and the warning written in red. Why didn't anyone support him? Some did quietly. Quiet support doesn't help much when reports say something else. Walter crossed his arms. Daniel became obsessed with proving the original boundary. That's what everyone called it, obsession. Easier than admitting he might have been right. He rose slowly and opened a cupboard. From behind a stack of tins, he removed a narrow envelope, yellowed at the edges. Daniel Pierce's name appeared in the corner, but there was no stamp. He gave me this years ago, Walter said. Told me to mail it if anything happened to him. Nothing dramatic happened. He just kept living up there, and I kept putting it off. Emma turned the envelope over. It had been addressed to the Regional Forestry Review Board. The seal had never been closed. May I read it? Walter nodded. The letter inside was 4 pages long. Daniel described conflicting surveys, missing originals, and pressure to accept revised acreage calculations. He named dates, report numbers, and meetings, but accused no single person directly. Near the end, the handwriting became heavier. I cannot certify measurements I did not take, nor approve boundaries contradicted by field markers still standing on the land. Emma read the sentence aloud. Ben glanced at Walter. What happened after he wrote this? Walter stared into the stove. The station supervisor ordered Daniel to revise his final report. Daniel refused. And then Emma asked. They suspended him first, said he was insubordinate and emotionally compromised. A month later, they removed him from field duty. Walter rubbed both hands over his face. By spring, he was gone from the service.
Emma felt the words settle inside her with painful familiarity.
A career reduced to a decision made in an office. Years of work dismissed with formal language. He was fired. They called it administrative termination. Walter looked directly at her. But yes, Daniel Pierce lost his job because he would not change the survey. Emma folded Daniel's termination letter into Walter Kane's envelope. On the drive to the forest station, she kept seeing the same phrase in her mind, refused to change the survey. She had wondered whether Daniel was stubborn or mistaken. Now she understood that he had lost everything over a line on a map. By sunrise the next morning, she and Ben had spread the red-circled survey across the station table. Daniel's coordinates pointed north of Blackwater Ridge, beyond the old logging road Walter had described. Ben traced the route with one finger. "The road won't take us all the way," he said. "Storms washed out the upper section years ago." Emma packed water, rope, the field ledger, a compass, and copies of the disputed maps. She also carried Daniel's long key, though she could not explain why. They left before the mist lifted from the trees. Ben's truck climbed the first miles slowly, tires sliding over wet stone. At a collapsed culvert, they had to stop. The remaining route was buried beneath alder and young fir. They continued on foot, following a faint roadbed softened by moss. Every few hundred yards, Emma checked Daniel's coordinates against the compass. Fallen trunks blocked the slope, and several drainage channels had widened into steep gullies. Near midday, they reached a clearing where rusted cable and a rotting fuel drum marked the end of an abandoned logging spur. Ben knelt beside a stump almost hidden by ferns. "Old cut," he said. "Late 80s, maybe early 90s.
Beyond the clearing, the trees changed.
Douglas fir gave way to cedar trunks so wide Emma could not see around them without moving. The air cooled beneath the canopy. Moss covered the ground in deep green layers, and the noise of the wind faded. Emma opened Daniel's photograph envelope and compared one image with the slope ahead. The same forked cedar stood beside a narrow stream, larger now, but unmistakable. "He came back here for years," she said. Ben studied the ridge. "And nobody cut it?" Daniel had stopped the first crew, but the maps suggested the boundary dispute had never been formally resolved. If the revised survey had stood, this forest should have been logged decades ago. They followed the stream toward the first coordinate. Daniel's ledger described a granite outcrop and a cedar-bearing scar. The granite remained, but the scar had grown over until only a shallow line showed in the bark. 10 feet uphill, Ben cleared needles from a square iron post driven into the ground. A stamped number appeared beneath the rust. Emma checked it against Daniel's notes. It matched the original survey, not the county revision. "One marker could be misplaced," Ben said, though his voice had changed. "Then we find the next one." The second coordinate lay across a steep ravine. They crossed on a fallen trunk slick with rain. Emma moved slowly, staring at Ben's boots rather than the water below. Halfway over, the bark shifted beneath her foot. Ben caught her wrist before she fell. "You all right?" he asked. Emma nodded. "I'm tired of people telling me where the safe path is. That wasn't what I was doing." "I know." She looked back at the ravine. "That's why I'm still following you." On the far side, they found a stone cairn collapsed beneath roots. Inside it, A brass survey cap carried the same sequence Daniel had recorded. The line between the two markers ran west of the official county boundary by nearly half a mile. Ben took photographs and measured the bearings twice. "Daniel's map is holding," he said. Emma looked into the untouched timber beyond them. For the first time since losing her job, she felt useful. She understood the notes and the logic of repeated measurements. Daniel's work no longer looked like obsession. It looked like patience, forced to survive without witnesses. Her phone vibrated as they climbed toward the third coordinate. A message appeared when the signal briefly returned. It was from Philip Arden, the estate attorney. A formal notice had been filed against the property, challenging access rights and claiming potential boundary encroachment on land managed by Morris Timber. "Caleb," she said. Ben read the message over her shoulder. "He's trying to freeze any transfer or restoration work until the boundary is reviewed. Can he take the station?" "Not immediately, but he can make everything expensive." Emma thought of the $18 she had arrived with. Martha's unpaid bread. And the roof still held by a tarp. Caleb did not need to prove ownership quickly. He only needed to make her unable to defend it. She saved the message and kept moving. The third coordinate stood near the top of a narrow ridge where lightning had split an old pine. Daniel's ledger called for a buried stone witness and a steel marker. They found the stone, but the marker was gone. Fresh soil showed where something had been pulled from the earth. Ben crouched beside the hole. This was disturbed recently. Tire tracks were impossible on the ridge, but a boot print remained in the mud. Emma felt anger rise, sharper than fear. Someone had reached the marker before them. They searched the surrounding slope until rain began tapping through the canopy. Ben found a short length of rusted chain beneath a root. Emma followed it to a mound of packed soil several yards from the original coordinate. They dug with a folding shovel and their hands. The chain ended around a steel survey post laid horizontally under the earth. Its cap matched Daniel's records. Beneath it, the shovel struck something hollow. Emma cleared the remaining dirt and uncovered a rectangular container wrapped in black, waterproof fabric. The corners were sealed with old resin, and a small brass lock held the lid shut. She wiped mud from the lock, reached into her pocket, and drew out Daniel's long key. The long key entered the brass lock without resistance. Emma turned it once, and the mechanism opened with a soft click that seemed impossibly small beneath the rain. Ben helped lift the container from the ground and carried it beneath the shelter of a leaning cedar. The black wrapping had kept most of the moisture out. Inside, sealed in waxed cloth, lay 3 field journals, a bundle of photographs, and a narrow packet of letters tied with faded cord. Emma opened the first journal. Daniel's handwriting was steadier than in the notebook from the station, but the entries began several years after his dismissal. He had continued returning to Blackwater Ridge alone, checking the original markers, measuring stream crossings, and photographing the Cedar Basin through every season. Each visit had a date, temperature, bearing, and route condition. He noted landslides, wind damage, and any sign that the old logging road had been reopened. He kept doing the job after they took the job from him. Emma said, Ben turned one of the photographs toward the gray light. It showed Daniel beside the exposed steel marker they had just uncovered. He looked older, his beard streaked with white, one hand resting on the post as if it were the shoulder of an old friend. The next journal explained why he had hidden the container. County records had been revised again, removing references to 2 original markers. Daniel feared that anyone relying only on the official files would believe the older line had never existed. He wrote that the forest station was being watched and that selected documents had already disappeared from storage. The waterproof box was his second archive, placed where only someone using the original coordinates would find it. Emma felt the weight of the years between his entries. Daniel had expected no apology and no quick rescue. He had simply refused to let the evidence vanish in the final journal. His writing became uneven. He described pain in his hands, difficulty climbing the ridge, and the growing certainty that he would not live to see the survey corrected. One entry had been underlined twice. "I have stopped expecting them to restore my name. The trees do not need my name. They need the line to remain where it was measured." Emma lowered the book. Since losing her own job, she had imagined vindication as a door that might reopen if someone admitted the decision had been wrong. Daniel had lived without that door for decades. He had found another reason to keep going. Ben sat beside her on the wet ground. He knew no one might believe him. He said, "He did it anyway." Emma looked through the cedar trunks toward the hidden basin. "I thought inheriting the station meant someone had left me a problem." "Maybe he left you a choice." She almost smiled. "That sounds like something Martha would say." She'd say it better. They wrapped the journals again and began descending before the rain worsened. The ravine had risen, turning the shallow water below the fallen trunk into a fast, brown channel. Ben crossed first, then reached back for the container. Emma stepped carefully, but the bark was slicker than before. Her foot slid near the center. She dropped to one knee and caught the trunk with both hands. Ben moved toward her, but she steadied herself before he reached her. "Don't pull me," she said through clenched teeth. "Just stay there." He stopped. Emma shifted her weight, found a knot beneath her boot, and crossed the remaining distance. On the far bank, her hands shook. Ben took the container without comment. That silence felt more respectful than reassurance. They reached the truck near dusk. A typed notice had been tucked beneath the windshield wiper. It warned that entry beyond the disputed boundary could be considered trespass pending legal review. Morris Timber's name appeared at the bottom. Emma read it twice, then folded it into her jacket. "He knew where we were going," she said, "or guessed from the map." Ben replied, "Either way, he wants us to stop." Back at the station, they carried the box into the survey room and set it beside the original plats. Emma compared Daniel's field notes with the documents already on the shelves. Dates matched. Marker numbers matched. Photographs matched the cedar stands they had seen that day. The hidden archive did not merely support Daniel's claim. It showed that he had monitored the disputed line for years after his termination, preserving a record no official office still possessed. Near midnight, Emma untied the packet of letters. Most were drafts to review boards, county surveyors, and former supervisors. None had been sent. Daniel had crossed out angry passages and rewritten them in precise, restrained language. One letter was different. It had no address, only the words, "To the person who finds this." Emma unfolded it. Daniel wrote that the station and its records might one day pass to someone who knew nothing about him. He did not ask that person to clear his name. He asked only that they look at the evidence, walk the original line, and decide whether the forest deserved another witness. Emma read the final paragraph aloud. "A person can lose a position, a reputation, even every friend who once stood beside them. What remains is the choice to protect what is true when protection brings no reward." Her voice broke on the last words. Ben looked away, giving her privacy without leaving. For the first time since the white envelope had been placed before her at work, Emma did not feel discarded. She felt selected. Though she still did not know why Daniel had chosen her, at the bottom of the packet lay one sealed envelope she had overlooked. Unlike the others, it was addressed to Daniel in another man's handwriting. The name in the corner belonged to someone Emma recognized from the old crew photograph. Inside was a single page dated shortly before Daniel's termination. The writer admitted that he had given supervisors access to Daniel's original plats and helped replace them with revised copies. Emma read the signature twice. It belonged to Daniel's closest field partner. Emma read the confession again before placing it beside Daniel's journals. The signature belonged to Martin Hales, the survey partner standing closest to Daniel in the old crew photograph. The letter was brief, written in careful handwriting that carried more regret than explanation. Martin admitted he had surrendered access to the original survey plats after supervisors insisted revised copies would become the official record. He claimed he believed the changes were temporary, meant only to settle a dispute over administrative boundaries. By the time he realized the originals had been removed and Daniel blamed the decision could no longer be undone, he apologized for his silence but never claimed innocence. Ben folded the letter carefully. "This explains how the originals disappeared," he said. "It doesn't explain why the revisions stayed." Emma nodded. "No, but it proves Daniel wasn't imagining any of it." The following morning, Ben contacted the Regional Forestry Archives and requested access to retired survey files connected to Blackwater Ridge. The response surprised both of them. A storage building in the county seat still held uncatalogued engineering boxes transferred after several offices merged decades earlier. With Martha agreeing to watch the station for the day, Emma and Ben drove to the archives. The warehouse smelled of old paper and dust. Shelves stretched across a dim room where thousands of records sat untouched. An elderly records clerk listened patiently as Ben explained what they were searching for. "Blackwater Ridge," she repeated. "Most people haven't asked about that district in years." She disappeared into the aisles and returned pushing a cart stacked with gray archive boxes. Hours passed as Emma sorted brittle folders, survey logs, and faded correspondence. Many files duplicated what Daniel had preserved, but one narrow binder immediately caught her attention. Its cover carried the original district number Daniel had written repeatedly in his journals. Inside were field verification sheets signed by multiple survey teams over several years. Every measurement matched Daniel's original boundary. None matched the revised county map. Emma placed the verification sheets beside the disputed plats from the survey room. The coordinates, bearings, and marker numbers aligned perfectly. "These were never destroyed?" she whispered. "They were just buried." Ben examined the approval stamps and never referenced again. The records clerk returned with another carton discovered behind outdated engineering manuals. It contained aerial photographs taken before the disputed revision. The tree lines, ridges, and streams matched Daniel's photographs from the hidden survey room almost exactly. Emma felt years of uncertainty falling away piece by piece. Daniel had not built his case on memory or emotion. Every document pointed to the same conclusion. Before leaving, the records clerk printed certified copies of the verification sheets and signed a release confirming their origin from official archive holdings. Emma thanked her more than once. "People think old records stop mattering," the woman said as she handed over the folder. "Sometimes they matter most after everyone forgets them." News of Emma's search spread quickly through the small community. Martha quietly told customers that Daniel's records were proving reliable. Walter confirmed the archived measurements matched the original markers he remembered. Even Arthur, who had once dismissed Daniel's warnings, admitted he had never known official verification sheets still existed. Gradually, people stopped referring to Daniel as the stubborn ranger who could not move on. They began calling him the surveyor who had never stopped protecting the ridge. Caleb Morris reacted differently. 2 days later, he appeared outside the forest station with a county assessor and questioned whether Emma had the expertise to interpret historical survey material. He suggested that old field notes could easily be misunderstood without modern context. Emma remained calm. "That's why I requested certified archive copies." She showed the assessor the verification sheets beside Daniel's originals. The assessor compared dates and reference numbers without commenting. Caleb attempted another approach. Historical paperwork doesn't always reflect current legal boundaries. Maybe not, Emma replied, but it reflects the truth of what was measured. Caleb said nothing more before leaving, though the confidence that had marked every earlier visit was gone. That evening, several local residents arrived unexpectedly at the station, carrying supplies. Martha brought groceries. Walter delivered a replacement roof tarp and spare lantern glass. June donated storage boxes so the recovered documents could be organized safely. No speeches were made. They simply worked together, repairing shelves, covering leaks, and carefully sorting maps, photographs, and journals inside the hidden survey room. Emma watched them moving quietly through the station and realized Daniel had not been completely forgotten. People had remembered him in fragments. They had simply never possessed enough evidence to defend him. As darkness settled, Ben finished comparing the certified archive copies with the originals preserved in the survey room. Every coordinate matched. Every disputed marker aligned. He placed the final document on the table and looked at Emma. "There's nothing left to reconcile," he said. "The official verification supports Daniel's survey completely." Emma rested both hands on the worn workbench where Daniel had spent so many years protecting records no one wanted to read. The station felt different now. It no longer seemed like an abandoned building holding old papers. It had become the place where the truth had quietly survived long enough for someone else to find it. Among the certified copies lay one final memorandum that had been overlooked inside the archive binder. It bore the signature of a senior regional survey supervisor and the date immediately preceding Daniel's dismissal. The final line read simply, "Original field measurements submitted by Daniel Pierce are confirmed accurate and require no correction." Emma placed the regional supervisor's memorandum inside a clear, protective sleeve and carried it to the county review office with Daniel's original plats, the certified verification sheets, Martin Hales's confession, and copies of the photographs from Blackwater Ridge. Ben drove. Martha sat in the back seat holding the archive box as if it contained something fragile enough to breathe. The hearing room was smaller than Emma expected. 3 county officials sat behind a long table, joined by a state forestry representative and a survey examiner. Caleb Morris occupied a chair near the side wall with his attorney. He did not look at Emma when she entered. For almost 2 hours, the officials compared Daniel's records with the county maps, archive files, and measurements Ben had taken at the surviving field markers. Emma answered questions about where each document had been found and how the hidden survey room had been opened. Ben described the original posts at Blackwater Ridge and the recently disturbed marker they had recovered from the buried container. The survey examiner studied the red-circled map, then placed it beside the official verification sheets. "These bearings are consistent across every original source," he said. Caleb's attorney argued that historical discrepancies did not automatically invalidate later property management decisions. The state representative asked whether Morris Timber possessed any field measurements supporting the revised boundary. Caleb's attorney produced a county plat and 2 administrative summaries but no original survey notes, marker records, or signed verification. Emma watched Caleb's confidence narrow into silence. When the regional memorandum was read aloud, the room became still. "Original field measurements submitted by Daniel Pierce are confirmed accurate and require no correction." The date proved that Daniel's work had been validated before his dismissal, then ignored when the revised map remained in circulation. The officials did not declare why that had happened, but they no longer questioned which boundary was genuine. By late afternoon, the county panel suspended the revised plat, recognized Daniel's original survey as the controlling historical record pending final state registration, and rejected Morris Timber's encroachment claim against the Forest Station parcel. Any logging activity near the Cedar Basin was halted until permanent conservation review could be completed. Outside the building, Walter waited beside Martha's truck with June, Arthur, and several residents Emma recognized from the store. No one cheered. The moment felt too solemn for celebration. Walter removed his cap. He should have heard that himself, he said. Emma looked down at the archive box. Maybe this is the closest we can give him. Arthur cleared his throat. I called him crazy more than once. Shame tightened his face. I should have walked the line before I judged him. Emma did not tell him it was all right. Some regrets deserved to remain honest. She only said, You came today. The weeks that followed were filled with inspections, statements, and careful verification. State surveyors returned to Blackwater Ridge, photographed each surviving marker, and confirmed the original line on modern equipment. Forestry specialists documented the Cedar Basin and found old-growth trees, undisturbed stream habitat, and plant communities rare in the surrounding managed timberland. The forest station was temporarily listed as a protected historical site because its survey room contained the most complete surviving record of the boundary dispute. Caleb withdrew his purchase offer and abandoned the access claim. His attorney sent a brief notice stating that Morris Timber would respect the review process. Emma read it once, then filed it without satisfaction. She had imagined defeating him would feel like reclaiming something. Instead, the real victory was quieter. The trees remained standing, and Daniel's measurements were finally spoken as fact. The station itself still demanded work. Rain entered through 2 roof seams. The porch leaned. Mice had chewed through boxes in the bunk room. Yet people arrived each weekend with tools, lumber, food, and time. Ben replaced damaged supports while Walter repaired window frames. June began cataloging the correspondence. Martha organized a donation jar at the store labeled Save the Old Station, though Emma protested until she saw the first bills folded inside. Children came with their parents to carry small boards and sweep the porch. For the first time, the building sounded occupied rather than haunted. A representative from the county historical office installed a temporary plaque near the entrance, identifying the site as the Daniel Pierce Forest Survey Station. Emma stood before it after everyone had gone home. Daniel's name looked unfamiliar in clean black letters. For decades, he had been remembered as difficult, obsessive, and wrong. Now officials used words like accurate, persistent, and essential. None of them captured the cost of his choice. Emma understood that part better than they did. One evening, Ben found her sitting on the porch with Caleb's original purchase offer folded in her lap. Still considering it, he asked. She looked toward the dark line of trees. Months earlier, the amount had seemed like rescue. Now it looked like a price attached to surrender. She tore the paper once down the center, then again. No. Ben sat beside her. What will you do with the station? Keep it? The answer frightened her, but it did not feel uncertain. Restore what we can. Protect the records. Let people see why the place mattered. That's a lot of work. I know. Emma smiled faintly. I seem to have inherited help. Ben looked toward the lanterns glowing through the windows, where Martha and June were still sorting files. You did. The state later issued an interim order placing the Cedar Basin under conservation protection, while permanent designation moved forward. The county corrected the disputed boundary in its records and formally withdrew the challenge against Emma's parcel. Daniel's original maps were copied for secure storage, but the originals remained in the hidden survey room under controlled conditions. Emma spent days labeling shelves and matching loose photographs to journal entries near the back wall, behind a stack of metal instrument cases. She noticed a small wooden box wedged beneath the lowest shelf. It was darker than the other storage containers and sealed with a thin band of tarnished brass. No number appeared on the lid. Only her name had been carved into the wood. Emma Carter. Her hands went still. Daniel had written it years before she inherited the station. Ben crouched beside her as she lifted the box onto the workbench. The long key did not fit. A smaller key had been tied beneath the box with faded string. Emma cut it free, inserted it into the lock, and heard the mechanism turn. Emma turned the small key slowly. The brass lock released with a quiet click, unlike the heavy steel mechanisms that had guarded the survey room and the waterproof archive. This one sounded almost gentle. She lifted the lid carefully. Inside rested a single envelope, a small leather notebook, and an old photograph wrapped in thin tissue paper. The envelope bore her name in Daniel Pierce's familiar handwriting. For several seconds, she simply looked at it. "He knew you by name," Ben said softly. Emma nodded, though she could not remember meeting her uncle more than once as a child. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Daniel's handwriting was slower than in the journals, but steady enough to read. "Emma," it began, "if this letter has reached you, then the station has survived longer than I expected, and someone has finally opened the room I hoped would remain hidden until the evidence could protect itself." Emma paused before continuing. Daniel explained that he had watched distant relatives from afar after leaving public service. He had never wished to burden them with the disputes surrounding the station, but he had quietly followed their lives through holiday cards and family notices Martha occasionally shared. When he learned Emma had chosen forestry as a profession, he began believing there might one day be someone capable of understanding the records without being consumed by anger over what had happened to him. "I am not leaving this place to the person most deserving," Daniel wrote. "I am leaving it to the person most likely to understand that the forest was always more important than my reputation." Emma lowered the letter, unable to speak. Every difficult year Daniel had described suddenly felt connected to the quiet decisions she had made in her own life. She had entered forestry because she loved walking among trees, not because she wanted promotions or recognition. Somewhere along the way, she had forgotten that. Ben remained silent, giving her space to finish reading. Daniel admitted he had considered destroying many of the records during his darkest years. He had imagined no one would ever believe them. Yet every time he stood among the cedars, he remembered why the surveys existed in the first place. They were promises made on behalf of land that could not argue for itself. "If my name disappears," he wrote, "let the measurements remain. If the measurements remain, then someday someone honest will find them." Emma smiled through tears. He believed this day would come. Ben looked toward the shelves surrounding them. He just didn't know who would make it happen. Emma opened the small leather notebook. Unlike the field journals, it contained no survey measurements. Instead, Daniel had recorded ideas for restoring the forest station after the dispute ended. He imagined school groups visiting the survey room to learn how forests were measured before satellites and digital mapping. He described exhibits showing original compasses, chains, photographs, and handwritten plats. One page carried a rough sketch of the main office converted into a small educational center. Another listed local volunteers he hoped might someday help, including Martha Green, Walter Kane, and even Ben's father, who had passed away years earlier. Daniel had never stopped planning for a future he knew he might never see. The final photograph showed Daniel standing alone on the station porch shortly after the hidden survey room had been sealed. He looked directly into the camera with one hand resting against the wall behind which the records were hidden. On the back, he had written only a single sentence: "Truth sometimes needs a quiet place to wait." Weeks became months as restoration continued. The temporary roof gave way to new cedar shingles donated by local contractors. Volunteers repaired broken windows, reinforced the porch, and carefully cleaned the survey room without disturbing its original arrangement. June finished cataloging every photograph and journal. Walter identified forgotten landmarks in Daniel's older maps. Martha organized community dinners that raised enough money to preserve the station without selling any part of the property. State officials completed their review and permanently designated the Cedar Basin as protected conservation land. The corrected boundary became part of the official public record. Daniel Pierce's survey was formally recognized as the accurate historical survey for Blackwater Ridge. A small ceremony marked the reopening of the forest station as an educational center dedicated to the history of forest surveying and conservation. School children wandered between display tables where Daniel's original instruments rested beside enlarged copies of his maps. Ben demonstrated how survey markers were located in the field. Martha told stories about the early days of the station. Walter answered questions that no textbook could explain. Emma watched families study the photographs that had once gathered dust inside the hidden room. People no longer asked why Daniel had refused to change his survey. They asked how one person had managed to preserve so much history alone. Late that afternoon, after the visitors had gone home and the last folding chairs had been stacked away, Emma returned to the survey room one final time. She checked the humidity monitor, straightened a folder on the shelf, and placed Daniel's letter inside the protected archive with his journals. The room no longer felt hidden because of secrecy. It felt protected because its purpose had finally been fulfilled. Ben appeared quietly in the doorway. "Ready?" he asked. Emma looked once more at the shelves that had changed her life. Months earlier, she had arrived with $18, no job, and no idea where she belonged. She had believed the forest station was little more than an unwanted burden. Instead, it had given her a family she had never truly known, a community she had never expected, and a purpose no employer could ever take away. She switched off the light, stepped into the hallway, and gently closed the heavy steel door. The lock engaged with a reassuring click. Outside, beside the entrance, a newly carved wooden sign hung where every visitor could see it. Emma ran her hand across the smooth lettering before stepping back. It read, "History is protected here." She smiled, pulled the station door closed behind her, and walked into the quiet forest, where the survey lines remained exactly where Daniel Pierce had measured them so many years before.